I am Vivian Hale. I am 67 years old, a retired school librarian who once believed that the greatest legacy I could leave behind was the love I poured into my husband and my only daughter. For decades I lived quietly, a woman who sacrificed her own dreams so her family could rise. But one night in Texas, everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family shattered. I flew to Texas unannounced. No one knew I was coming. I had grown restless, sensing something was wrong with Evelyn, my daughter. A mother's intuition is a strange compass. It pulls you toward the truth even when you do not want to face it. That night, I walked into a world split in two. On one side was the hospital ICU. White lights glared down on metal rails and sterile sheets. The steady beep of a monitor cut through the air like a hammer striking my ribs. Evelyn lay there, pale and frail, her chest rising with painful effort. When I touched her hand, it felt cold, as if she was already slipping away. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Mom, please, do not live alone forever." Those were the words of a daughter who knew she would not last the night. But as I stood frozen in that silence, there was another image burning in my mind. Just a few miles away, my son-in-law, Marcus, was not at her bedside. He was in a luxury bar raising a glass of amber liquor under neon lights. A woman draped across his shoulder, laughter spilling from his mouth. Music pounded, bottles clinked, and he toasted to life, while the woman I brought into this world was fighting for hers. That contrast nearly tore me apart, the white light of the ICU against the pulsing glow of a nightclub, the sound of a heart monitor against the thud of bass music, my daughter's dying breath against his careless smile. I cannot tell you the kind of storm that raged inside me, grief, fury, and an unbearable loneliness. But I did not shout. I did not curse. I carried my silence like a weapon. Within an hour, every bank account Marcus was draining was frozen. His credit card stopped. His access to Evelyn's life savings vanished into the air. And as I sat in my daughter's empty house with her scarf clutched in my lap, my phone lit up. His voice on the other end turned from rage to begging, from threats to pleading. And through it all, I said nothing. I let the silence speak for me. That night, I realized that justice does not always arrive with a gavel or a gun. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a mother's steady hand closing the door on betrayal. But hear me when I say this. I did not arrive at that moment easily. Behind that silence was a journey through heartbreak, discovery, and choices I never believed I had the strength to make. What you have just heard was the end of a battle, not the beginning. To understand how a quiet woman like me could turn grief into justice, you need to walk back with me to the first step of this story. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you had flown across the country only to find your child abandoned in a hospital bed while their spouse toasted with strangers in luxury, what would you have done? Would you scream? Would you forgive? Or would you let silence carry the weight of justice? I invite you to stay with me, listen closely, and perhaps by the end, you will have your own answer. Because this is not only a story of betrayal and grief, it is also a story of awakening, of healing, and of finding strength in places I thought were lost forever. And it all began the moment I stepped off that plane in Texas, carrying nothing but a suitcase, my father's old watch, and a gnawing fear that I was already too late. I stepped off that plane in Dallas with nothing but a single suitcase and my father's old pocket watch tucked in my coat. The flight from California had been short in hours but endless in wait. I am 67 years old, a widow for nearly 2 decades, and I had not seen my daughter Evelyn in almost a year. I told no one I was coming. I needed to see her with my own eyes, to hear her voice without warning, to know the truth of her life without the polished veneer she sometimes used to reassure me over the phone. Something inside my chest had been gnawing for weeks, a mother's instinct whispering that something was deeply wrong. The terminal air felt heavy and stale. Each step through the corridor echoed with a loneliness I had known too well since my husband passed. Evelyn was all I had left, my one anchor. Yet even with her, I had learned to accept long silences, brief calls, and visits cut short because Marcus, her husband, always seemed to have somewhere else to be. I never said it aloud, but I felt his contempt. He treated me as though I were a fragile relic, a reminder of obligations he did not want. I swallowed that humiliation in silence because my daughter loved him, and I wanted her happiness more than my pride. On the plane ride, my thoughts kept circling back to one memory. Evelyn was no more than 5, her hair in braids, her small hand clutching mine on the porch one stormy night. She pressed her cheek against my arm and whispered, "Mom, do not ever leave me. Promise me you will never let go." I bent down, kissed her head, and promised, "I will never leave you, my darling. Not ever." That vow had carried me through widowhood, through nights when the bed felt like an ocean, through mornings when silence stretched louder than any clock. As the plane cut across the Texas sky, I stared out the window, searching the horizon for comfort. Instead, unease tightened around my ribs like iron bands. Every dip of turbulence made my stomach churn, not because I feared flying, but because my spirit already knew what my body refused to accept. My Evelyn was in trouble, and I might already be too late. I tried to distract myself by flipping through the in-flight magazine, but the glossy pictures of beaches and hotels blurred before my eyes. I set it aside, closed my eyes, and whispered a prayer. When we landed, the air outside hit me with a wall of humidity and heat. The taxi ride to her town stretched long and restless. Palm trees swayed, but instead of beauty, they seemed like mourners bowing their heads. I pressed my palm over the pocket watch, the one my father gave me before his last deployment. Its ticking reminded me of all the times I had waited for men I loved to come home. My husband, my father, and now my daughter. I feared this time the waiting would end differently. As the cab turned onto her street, I noticed the details first. The grass outside her home was overgrown, the mailbox stuffed with envelopes, some yellow with age, curtains drawn tightly against the Texas sun. It looked less like a home and more like a shell. My pulse pounded. I told myself maybe she was traveling, maybe Marcus had neglected the yard. But a darker certainty pressed against my chest. I paid the driver and stood on the cracked sidewalk, my hands trembling slightly as I adjusted the strap of my suitcase. I wanted to knock, to call out her name, to break the silence that wrapped around the house. But before I could, I heard a voice behind me. Martha Reyes, her neighbor, hurried over with worry etched across her face. "Vivian," she said softly, "you do not know. Evelyn has been in the hospital, intensive care, 2 weeks now." The world tilted beneath my feet. My suitcase slipped from my hand. Martha explained more, but her words blurred into fragments. "ICU alone, ambulance 2 weeks. And Marcus?" I forced myself to ask, though my throat felt raw. Martha hesitated, eyes darting away. "He has been seen around town, living his own life. He has not been at the hospital." I felt the blood drain from my face. My chest grew so tight I could not breathe. Evelyn, my little girl who once begged me never to leave her, had been lying in a sterile hospital bed fighting for her life, while her husband carried on as if she were already gone. In that moment, I realized the isolation I had carried for years was nothing compared to the abandonment Evelyn had suffered. Standing in front of that neglected house, I knew 2 things with absolute clarity. First, I was already too late to protect her from weeks of pain. Second, I would not be too late to fight for her dignity, her legacy, and her truth. My silence had been my shield for too long, but now it would become my weapon. I bent down, lifted my suitcase again, and whispered to myself, "Hold on, Evelyn. Mom is here." I stood in front of Evelyn's house, hoping against reason that Martha had been mistaken, that my daughter might open the door herself and laugh at the worry I carried across state lines. But the silence was absolute. The curtains were drawn tight. The mailbox leaned under the weight of envelopes spilling from its mouth. My chest tightened as I bent to pick one up. It was an overdue notice, the red letters screaming louder than any voice. Another envelope slipped to the ground, revealing a water shut-off warning. Evelyn had always been diligent, meticulous even. To see her life in disarray felt like seeing a mirror crack. I forced myself to the porch. My hand shook as I tried the knob. It opened too easily. Marcus had left it unlocked. The smell hit me first, stale and sour, a scent of air trapped for weeks without care. I stepped inside, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a protest. The living room was dim. Dust floated in the streak of light cutting through the curtains. On the couch, a green scarf lay folded neatly, the one I had given Evelyn on her 30th birthday. She had loved its softness, wrapping it around her shoulders whenever she felt cold. I picked it up, pressed it against my cheek, and felt the sting of tears I could not let fall. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, unpaid bills, unopened letters, reminders of a life interrupted. Empty glasses sat abandoned, rings of dried water marking the surface. In the kitchen, dishes stacked high in the sink, a faint sourness rising from them. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, steady but hollow. I thought of Evelyn moving through these rooms, tired from treatments I had not known about, carrying burdens she had hidden from me. The thought pressed into my chest like a stone. "Vivian," Martha's voice came from the doorway, gentler this time. "We need to go. She is at the hospital, ICU. 2 weeks now. You should be there." I clutched the scarf tighter, nodded, and followed her out. My legs felt unsteady, as if the ground itself rejected me. The drive to the hospital blurred. I remember the red lights stretching too long, the radio in the cab playing some upbeat tune that cut against the weight of my silence. I pressed my palm over the scarf in my lap, gripping it like a lifeline. My father's watch ticked in my pocket, every beat a reminder that I was running out of time. When the glass doors of the hospital slid open, the smell of antiseptic rushed out, sharp and unforgiving. The receptionist looked up as I gave my name, her eyes softening when I said Evelyn's. She directed me to the 5th floor, room 512. My heart pounded as the elevator climbed. Each ding of the floor counter echoed like a countdown. The hallway was dim, lined with machines that beeped and whirred. Nurses moved quickly, their shoes whispering against the linoleum. I paused outside the door, pressing the scarf to my chest, then pushed it open. The sight of her nearly knocked me down. Evelyn lay pale against the white sheets, her frame shrunken beneath the gown. Tubes traced across her arms, wires tangled around her chest, monitors blinking their cold truths. Her lips were cracked, her skin almost translucent. Yet when I stepped closer, her eyelids fluttered. "Mom?" Her voice was a rasp, thinner than paper. I reached for her hand, icy beneath my palm. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." She tried to smile, the corners of her lips trembling. I didn't want you to worry." Her eyes, hazel like mine, searched my face as if memorizing me. "Promise me, Mom. Don't live alone forever. Please, don't let the world take your love away." I bent close, tears blurring the edges of her face. "I promise, Evelyn. I promise." Her chest rose once more, then fell. The monitor's steady beep stretched into a single piercing tone. Nurses rushed in, voices firm, hands moving with practiced urgency. "Step back, ma'am." They pressed against her chest, machines roared, commands filled the room. I stood frozen at the wall, the scarf clutched to my chest, my heart slamming against my ribs. The world slowed. I saw the rhythm of their hands pressing, the rise and fall of her lifeless body, the sharp glint of the defibrillator paddles. I heard nothing but my own heartbeat, heavy and hollow. The piercing tone did not stop. It filled my ears until there was no space left for thought. After endless minutes, the doctor turned to me. His expression was heavy, his voice quiet. "I am so sorry. We did everything we could." The room fell still. The nurses lowered their hands, one by one. Machines quieted, except for the tone that seemed to echo into my bones. I walked back to her side, smoothed a strand of hair from her forehead, and kissed it gently. Her skin was cool, her lips parted as if she had been about to say one more word. I did not cry. Not yet. Instead, I listened to the silence that had replaced her breath. I pressed the scarf against her chest as though it could capture the last trace of her warmth. I whispered, "You will never be alone, Evelyn. Not now, not ever." And in that sterile room, with the smell of disinfectant clinging to me and the weight of absence pressing down, I felt a piece of myself fracture. The world outside might still spin, cars might still honk, people might still laugh, but for me, time had splintered. All that was left was the hollow echo of her last request and the unbearable truth that I had arrived too late. I left the hospital carrying the green scarf like a fragile relic and drove back to Evelyn's house with both hands gripping the wheel. The sun drooped behind the roofs. The light felt metallic, as if the afternoon had been scrubbed with bleach. When I opened the door, the same stale air met me. This was the last place my daughter had truly lived. I switched on a lamp and the room climbed out of shadow, revealing everything she could no longer guard. On the coffee table lay the avalanche I had noticed earlier: bills, notices, glossy catalogs scattered without order. I pulled a chair close and began sorting. Electric, past due. Water, termination scheduled. Credit statement, payments missed. My hands stayed steady while my breath shortened. I slid open a thick envelope from the bank. Itemized charges fanned across the wood, a yacht charter out of Galveston, a jeweler's invoice for a men's Rolex, bottle service at an upscale bar. The dates lined up with her treatment days, each luxury purchase mirroring a needle in my daughter's arm. I set the statements in a row and let the numbers speak. Withdrawals from a joint savings account, cash advances, transfers labeled household convenience, household. The word tasted false. None of this served a home. It served a performance. While Evelyn sat beneath fluorescent lights, her husband rehearsed a life where she had already vanished. Under the remote waited a small leather notebook. I knew Evelyn's tidy handwriting on the cover. Notes. I opened to the center and felt my chest lock. Appointments marched down the page with heartbreaking precision. Oncology consult, infusion, scan results. Beside some entries, she had scribbled private reminders. Call mom, but keep voice light. No fear today. Ask Marcus to come. The space after that last line was blank, as if the pen had hovered, hopeful, then stopped. I turned the page and found a folded letter, waiting like a held breath. Mom, if you are reading this, I could not keep you safe from the truth any longer. I thought I could shield you from my fear. I was wrong. Please forgive me. Please do not live alone anymore. The pen strokes thinned on that sentence. The ink had caught on her trembling. She closed with a plea that felt like a benediction. Keep your heart open. Love again. Let kindness find a home here. I pressed the paper to my chest and listened to the hallway clock counting seconds I would never recover. I slid the letter back into the notebook and placed both in my purse as if they were bone. Then I kept going. A cruise brochure lay open to a champagne spread, a pen circle around an itinerary to Key West. Beneath it, another statement flagged a wire to a marina. Receipts from a boutique still carried a trace of perfume. Cufflinks boxed in velvet. A liquor subscription renewal. The math was simple and devastating. The scarf slipped from my lap. I rescued it quickly, ashamed of the panic in that motion, as though I had almost dropped part of her. I wrapped it around my shoulders. The wool held the faintest trace of her shampoo. The fabric steadied me like a railing. I searched the room for signs of companionship. A casserole dish, a bouquet drooping in stale water, a stack of get-well cards. There was almost nothing. On the refrigerator, a calendar showed 2 weeks of X marks over treatment days. In the corner, a pill organizer sat half full, as if the week itself had been interrupted. I opened a kitchen drawer and found a hospital packet by the bread box. Inside lay a copy of the visitor authorization list. The line for spouse was blank. No signatures, no scribbled times, no presence at all. Absence had been recorded in perfect order. I set the page down and pulled the scarf tighter. The house waited with me. Photos along the hallway watched from their frames. Evelyn with braces and a science fair ribbon. Evelyn in a AIS-E thrifted prom dress. Evelyn on her wedding day, laughing at something I can no longer recall. I touched the glass and felt the cool certainty that she had carried her fear alone. She had not wanted to burden me. She had hoped Marcus would grow into the man he promised to be. Love turns the faithful into optimists. It also leaves them undefended. I gathered the statements into a neat stack, clipped them, and slid them beside the notebook in my purse. The green fringe brushed my wrist and grounded me. That scarf would be my anchor, a thread leading me through grief toward whatever justice could still be found. I looked once more at the room, the dent in the cushion where she must have rested after an infusion, the mug stained with tea, the curtain bowed by a draft pretending to be a breeze. The truth had spoken without drama or witness. Evelyn had been brave and alone. Marcus had been absent except for his appetite. I turned off the lamp and locked the door. On the porch, the evening cooled while the neighborhood went on. Dogs barked, a bicycle rattled by, a sprinkler ticked across a small lawn. I stood with the key warming my palm and whispered, "You will not be erased." Then I tucked the key away and stepped into the gray light, carrying proof in my purse and my daughter at my throat. I sat at Evelyn's dining table with the green scarf wrapped around my shoulders and the stack of receipts spread before me like evidence in a trial. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, yet my ears rang with the echo of her last words. My daughter had died begging me not to live in loneliness, while her husband had been nowhere. The weight of that truth pressed down until I could hardly breathe. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. For years, I had swallowed my misgivings about Marcus to preserve peace for Evelyn. But peace was gone, and silence was no longer submission. It was a weapon I was finally ready to use. I scrolled to his number, the same one Evelyn had begged me to save when they married, just in case. My thumb hovered for a moment, then pressed. The call connected instantly. His face filled the screen in a blaze of neon. Marcus was in a high-end bar, the kind where champagne came in buckets of ice, and the music never dipped below a roar. Behind him, colored lights strobed across mirrored walls. A woman leaned against him, her dress glittering, her hand resting carelessly on his shoulder. 2 more women laughed nearby, their glasses raised. His own hand gripped a tumbler of amber liquor, the ice catching the light. He wore the Rolex I had seen on the invoice, its gold face gleaming against his tanned wrist. "Well, well, look who finally decided to call," he drawled, raising his glass toward the camera. "The mysterious mother-in-law. What's the occasion?" His smile was wide, careless, the smile of a man who believed he had already won. My voice came steady, though my throat burned. "Evelyn is gone. She died tonight." For a second, his grin faltered, then quickly reassembled itself. He shrugged as if I had told him the weather report. "I already knew it was coming. You should not act so surprised. The doctors told us months ago she would not last. Nothing to be done." He leaned back, sipping his drink, as the woman beside him whispered something in his ear. I held the phone still, studying every line of his expression. I wanted to believe some flicker of grief would pass over his face, some crack in his arrogance. but all I saw was relief disguised as indifference. "And the money?" I asked quietly. "The yacht? The jewelry? The accounts drained while she lay in the hospital bed?" He laughed, loud enough to turn a few heads around him. "Are you serious? I'm her husband. What's hers is mine. That's how marriage works, Vivian. Maybe in your old-fashioned world people pretend otherwise, but let's be honest. She is gone. The money is mine. End of story." Each word struck like a hammer, yet I did not flinch. His arrogance filled the screen, his voice a mixture of condescension and triumph. He believed I would argue, that I would shout and give him the satisfaction of my rage. He thought I would crumble the way he had seen me stay quiet at family dinners, retreating so Evelyn could avoid conflict. But not this time. I simply stared at him, letting the silence stretch. I watched the smirk begin to falter, the smile twitch at the edges as he realized I was not playing his game. The music thumped behind him. The women laughed again, oblivious. He shifted in his seat, tilting the glass as if the liquor could shield him from what he felt in that silence. For the first time, I understood the power of withholding words. Silence can cut deeper than any insult. It can strip a man of his armor when he expects attack and receives nothing. I leaned forward, filling the frame with my face, so he could see the lines time had carved into me, the steel in my eyes that had carried me through widowhood and now through the loss of my only child. Then, without another word, I pressed the button and ended the call. His smirk froze on the black screen before vanishing into nothing. The phone slid from my hand to the table. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my breathing came calm. I pulled the scarf tighter around my shoulders and whispered, "Your silence is all you will get from me." It was the first reversal of power, small but undeniable. For years, Marcus had treated me as a shadow, an inconvenience to be tolerated. In that moment, I became the mirror that reflected his emptiness back at him. He had expected tears, rage, or pleading. Instead, he received the one response he could not manipulate: nothing. I sat in the dim room with the scarf against my skin, the bills and receipts still spread out before me. The silence no longer felt like defeat. It felt like resolve. Evelyn's absence had left a wound I could never close, but her words had left me a directive. Do not live alone. Do not let your heart shut down. And do not let betrayal define the end of her story. I placed the phone face down, its black screen matching the quiet night outside. The house around me still smelled of neglect, but in my chest something steadier had taken root. Tonight, Marcus celebrated under neon lights, blind to the storm he had invited. He did not know that justice was already moving quietly through bank accounts and records, through evidence gathered in silence. And I, a woman he believed too old and too weak, was the one holding that silence in my hands like the sharpest blade. I did not sleep that night. I sat at Evelyn's dining table with the scarf wrapped around me, the receipts fanned across the wood, the letter folded neatly by my hand. The house ticked with silence, broken only by the refrigerator's hum and the creak of the old beams. I stared at the shadows on the wall until they blurred. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Evelyn as a little girl again, running barefoot through the yard, calling to me with her hair flying behind her. And every time I opened my eyes, I saw the hollow truth. She had died alone, while Marcus drank away her savings. I thought of my husband, Henry. He had been gone for 20 years, yet his voice still carried through my mind as if he were seated across from me. "Always stand tall, Vivian," he used to tell me. "No matter the storm, no matter the thunder, keep your back straight. That is how we honor the people we love." I pressed the scarf against my chest and whispered to him, "I am trying, Henry. I swear I am trying." Morning light crawled through the blinds. My hands moved with new certainty. I gathered the receipts, the bank statements, the notebook, and Evelyn's letter, placing them in a leather folder I had not touched since Henry's funeral. the scarf I draped around my shoulders like armor. Then I drove across town to see the only person I trusted to help me navigate what came next. Charles Benton's office smelled of old wood and strong coffee. He was a man in his 70s, with silver hair and a sharp mind that had once been Henry's closest confidant. We had shared dinners long ago, before time and distance stretched us apart. When I walked in, he rose from behind his desk, his expression softening into surprise and sorrow. "Vivian," he said, reaching for my hands, "I heard about Evelyn. I am so sorry." I nodded, unable to form thanks. Instead, I placed the leather folder on his desk and opened it. One by one, I laid the documents before him. The yacht charter, the Rolex receipt, the liquor invoices, the bank statements marked with overdrafts, and finally, Evelyn's notebook with her trembling handwriting. He studied each page with his lawyer's eyes, brows tightening. "Vivian," he said after a long silence, "this is exploitation. It is theft dressed in marital rights. He left her in that hospital while he drained her accounts." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "I want it stopped. I want every account frozen, every card canceled, every dollar moved out of his reach today. Evelyn did not live to see justice, but I will not let him dance on her grave with her money." Charles nodded slowly. "You have power of attorney from her last hospitalization, do you not?" "Yes," I answered, pulling the notarized document from my bag. "She signed it before my last trip out west. She wanted me to handle her affairs if she became too weak." He scanned the paper, then exhaled. "Then we can do this. It will not erase what he has done, but it will stop him from taking another cent." For the next hour, the office filled with the sound of typing keys and phone calls. Charles worked with quiet precision, contacting banks, flagging accounts, and sending urgent faxes. I sat across from him, my hands folded, my eyes fixed on the scarf's green fringe, resting against my sleeve. Every keystroke felt like a nail hammered into Marcus's careless empire. Finally, Charles slid a printed sheet across the desk. "It is done," he said. "All accounts are frozen. The joint assets are under your control until the court finalizes estate proceedings. Marcus cannot access a dime." I stared at the page, the black ink swimming for a moment before it cleared. For the first time since Evelyn's last breath, I drew a steady inhale. "Thank you, Charles," I whispered. "Do not thank me yet," he cautioned. "He will not go quietly. He will come at you angry. Be ready." I nodded. "Let him rage. I have weathered storms before." As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my bag. I pulled it out. Marcus's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring until voicemail captured his voice. The first message came sharp, laced with profanity and venom. "You think you can steal from me, old woman? You think you can touch what is mine?" The phone rang again, another voicemail. His tone rose, shouting, threatening lawyers, promising revenge. The phone rang a third time, and this time his voice shifted, softer, almost pleading. "Vivian, listen. I just need access to cover some expenses. We can work this out. I am her husband, after all. What is the point of punishing me now?" I held the phone in my palm, the vibrations rattling through my skin, then set it face down on Charles's desk. My silence was my answer. The scarf brushed my cheek, steady and warm despite its age. Evelyn had asked me not to live alone anymore. She had asked me to keep my heart open. I would honor her by standing tall, by refusing to let Marcus define the end of her story. When I walked out of Charles's office, the sun was high and sharp, striking the pavement with blinding light. My shadow stretched before me, longer and steadier than I felt. I whispered Henry's words to myself once more. "Stand tall, Vivian, no matter the storm." And this time, I believed I could. The chapel smelled of lilies and lemon polish, the kind of clean that pretends to hide what cannot be washed away. Evelyn's portrait stood on an easel near the altar, her smile caught in midsummer light. I took a seat in the second row and folded the green scarf across my lap. My fingers searched the fringe, as if the soft threads could steady the tremor under my ribs. Mourners drifted in and settled. Whispered condolences rose and fell. I looked at the polished casket, the thin seam where wood met wood, and tried to understand how my daughter could fit inside such quiet geometry. A hush swept the room when Marcus entered. He wore a tailored black suit and a face arranged for grief. Then he moved down the aisle with measured steps, stopping to clasp hands, to nod, to accept sympathy he had not earned. He sat in the front row, angled so his profile could be seen, and pressed a handkerchief to his lips. The gesture looked practiced, like a line read from a script. When the minister began, Marcus leaned forward, elbows on knees, head bowed. On the program, beneath Evelyn's name, someone had printed the words, "Beloved Wife." I wondered who chose them and what that word meant to her when nights stretched long and the phone stayed dark. The minister spoke about seasons, pain, and the way love lingers. People nodded. My world had stopped at a hospital monitor, and language could not coax it forward. Martha Reyes slid into the seat beside me halfway through the eulogy. She held my arm as if I might tip. "I wanted to wait until now," she whispered. "You should know the truth. The night Evelyn collapsed, I heard her fall. I ran across and she could barely speak. I called the ambulance. Marcus was not home. He'd been gone for hours. He never came before they took her." The words moved through me like cold air. I nodded because there was nothing else I could do without tearing the service in two. Martha squeezed my hand. "She was brave, Vivian. She asked me not to call you right away. She said she did not want you to worry." Her voice broke and she dabbed her eyes. "I am so sorry." "Thank you," I said, simple as a breath. Gratitude and sorrow sat side by side in my chest. The music swelled, a hymn Evelyn loved when she was a girl. I saw her at 9, swinging her feet from the pew, humming off-key, leaning into me with a warm shoulder. The scarf slipped and I gathered it again, cradling it like a small animal. When the time came for family remarks, Marcus stood. He spoke about devotion and courage. He called her his light. He placed a palm on the casket as if to claim it. His voice broke in two neat places. A murmur of sympathy traveled through the room. I watched him through the green haze of the scarf. There are performances you can applaud without believing. Funerals invite that kind of grace. I could not give it. He stepped down and moved to the aisle. For a second, our eyes met. He tilted his head by a fraction, an acknowledgement that looked like ownership, and I felt my spine lengthen. I did not glare. I did not nod. I held his gaze until he looked away. Silence again, my only answer. During the reception in the fellowship hall, paper cups clicked and small talk drifted like air conditioning. I stood near the window where the light was honest. Martha joined me with a plate of crackers. She told me the paramedics were kind. They spoke to Evelyn softly. They asked about a spouse, and she looked at the door, then at the floor, and said nothing. I thanked Martha again. When it was time to approach the casket, I walked alone. I placed my hand on the varnished lid and pictured the freckles on Evelyn's nose, the way she laughed with her whole body, the way she begged me not to live in loneliness. My reflection wavered on the polished surface, an older woman holding a scarf as if it were a vow. Behind me, I heard Marcus fielding condolences, his tone low, persuasive. Questions rose inside me with a pressure I could not ignore. Should I forgive the man who abandoned my child? If I forgive him, do I betray the woman I raised? Is mercy a door I open for him, or a door I close on myself? The moral math refused to balance. I felt Henry's old words lift in my memory. Stand tall, no matter the storm. Standing tall, I realized, sometimes means refusing to bow to the tidy ending people expect. I turned from the casket and faced the room. My grief did not need witnesses. My silence would write its own verdict. I crossed the aisle, passed within an arm's length of Marcus, and kept walking. The scarf brushed my throat, steadying each step. Outside, the sky had cleared to an unyielding blue. I drew a breath that hurt and also healed, then kept moving, because motion was the only prayer I had left now. Charles kept his word. A week after the funeral, I found myself back in his office, the scarf draped around my neck, a folder of documents heavier than any suitcase I had ever carried. He had already begun pulling threads, contacting banks, tracing withdrawals, and requesting records. Now it was time to prepare for court. He spread the papers across his desk. "Vivian, I want you to see this," he said, adjusting his glasses. He opened a printout of messages retrieved through a subpoena from Marcus's phone records. The words blurred, then sharpened as I read. To a friend, Marcus had written, "She won't last long anyway. Might as well enjoy what's here before it's gone." Another message, "Doctors say months at most. No reason to hold back. Life is short, hers shorter." I pressed a hand against my chest, steadying my breath. Each line was a blade, yet my face stayed calm, as though the years of holding myself together had trained me for this exact moment. Charles tapped the page gently. "These are the words of a man who abandoned his duty. They show intent, not grief, not love, but greed." I nodded. My voice came low. "I don't want revenge, Charles. I want justice." Evelyn deserved someone at her side, not someone draining her life while she lay dying. My silence will be my testimony. It will be louder than anything he shouts. Charles leaned back in his chair, studying me with something close to respect. "Most people come in wanting blood. You want clarity. That is harder to argue against in front of a judge." We built the case piece by piece. The receipts from the yacht charter, the jewelry, the liquor, the medical notes showing Evelyn admitted without a visitor, the statement from Martha about the night of the ambulance, and now the messages that exposed his heart. Each item fit together like glass shards forming a mirror, reflecting the truth of who Marcus was. As we worked, I thought of Evelyn's notebook, her delicate handwriting beside each treatment, her reminders to call me but keep her voice light. She'd carried her burden alone because she thought it would protect me. Now it was my turn to carry the weight for her. The scarf brushed against my wrist as I gathered the pages, a quiet anchor pulling me through. When we finished, Charles closed the folder. "The court will listen," he said firmly. "We have evidence, we have testimony, we have motive. It won't be easy, but the truth is clear." I rose, my legs stiff but steady. I am not afraid of him anymore. He only has words and rage. I have silence and proof. That night, at Evelyn's house, I laid everything on the dining table once more. The documents stood in a neat stack, the scarf folded beside them. I lit a candle by her photo. Its flame bent and straightened in the still air. I spoke aloud, though no one was there. "I will not let him define your story. I will not let your life end with his laughter. You gave me love. I will give you justice." The phone buzzed again, Marcus's name glowing. I did not answer. I let it slip to voicemail, then played it back. His voice surged with fury. "You think the court will believe you? You think a bitter old woman can strip me of my rights? I am her husband." Another message followed, softer. "Vivian, listen. We can settle this quietly. I don't need everything, just a portion. Be reasonable." I deleted them both. Silence again, my strongest weapon. He did not know how it unsettled him, how it forced him to confront the emptiness of his own words. Before bed, I stood at the window. The Texas night stretched wide and dark. I remembered Henry's voice. "Stand tall, no matter the storm." I whispered back, "I am standing, Henry. For her, for us." The trial loomed, but I felt no tremor, only resolve. I was not chasing vengeance. I was not hunting to destroy. I was carrying a truth too heavy to leave buried. Evelyn's plea still echoed, "Do not live alone." And I understood that keeping my heart open meant honoring her life with dignity, even if that dignity had to be carved out of a courtroom. The next morning, I returned to Charles with the folder in my arms, ready to face whatever storm Marcus would bring. My silence, sharpened by grief and steadied by love, would speak louder than any performance he attempted. And when the judge listened, I knew the truth would not be ignored. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and paper, a sterile scent that made my stomach tighten. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Charles, the scarf folded in my lap, my hands pressed against it as if it were the only shield I had. Across from me sat Marcus, clean-shaven, dressed in a dark suit that looked borrowed. He glanced at me once, then smirked, as though this were just another negotiation he would win with charm and bravado. The judge entered, and the room rose. My legs trembled but held. I thought of Evelyn, of the last breath that slipped from her lips, of the words she whispered, "Don't live alone." This was not about money, it was about dignity. Charles opened with quiet precision. He introduced the folder of evidence, laying each document in order. The first exhibit was a series of bank statements, each withdrawal marked in red. The screen behind him glowed with images, a yacht charter invoice, a receipt for a Rolex, charges from nightclubs, and hotel suites booked for weekends when Evelyn lay in the hospital. The courtroom murmured, the sound rippling like water against stone. Then came the messages. The bailiff projected them line by line. "She won't last long anyway." "Why wait? Enjoy it now." "Doctors say months. No reason to hold back." Each sentence echoed like a slap. I kept my gaze forward, but inside, my heart recoiled. My daughter's life measured in months, reduced to an excuse for indulgence. Next was the doctor's testimony. A woman in a gray blazer stood at the witness stand, her voice firm. Mrs. Hale's daughter was admitted to the ICU and remained there 2 weeks before her passing. No family members were recorded as visitors during that period. The patient often asked if her husband was coming. He never did. Her words pierced me deeper than any evidence could. Evelyn waiting, watching the door, clinging to hope that never came. Charles concluded, his tone controlled. This is not simply negligence. It is abandonment, accompanied by deliberate exploitation. The estate of Evelyn Hale deserves protection from a man who sought to profit from her death before her body was even laid to rest. Marcus rose then, his attorney nodding for him to speak. He adjusted his tie, looked at the judge, and began. "Your Honor, I am her husband. The law grants me rights to her assets. She shared her life with me, and what is hers is mine. If she chose to spend her final days in the hospital, it was her decision. I cannot be held accountable for how I coped with her illness." The audacity of those words settled over the room like smoke. I clenched the scarf tighter, the fabric digging into my palms. He spoke of coping, as if Evelyn's loneliness was her choice, as if his absence was mercy. My lips parted, but I did not speak. Silence steadied me. The judge leaned forward, his expression grave. He tapped the gavel once, silencing the whispers. This court has reviewed the evidence presented. Financial records, communications, witness testimony. The picture is clear. The deceased was abandoned, her assets misused, her trust violated. This court rules that all property belonging to Evelyn Hale shall be transferred to her mother, Vivian Hale, effective immediately. Furthermore, Marcus Hale is prohibited from accessing any accounts, properties, or personal effects of the deceased. His petition for spousal inheritance is denied. The sound of the gavel striking wood was final, sharp, like the closing of a heavy door. My chest lifted as though a weight had slid from my shoulders. Marcus turned, his face darkening, his mouth twitching with words unsaid. He leaned slightly toward me, as though to spit out venom one last time. I felt his stare, hot and desperate. My fingers tightened around the scarf, the threads rough beneath my skin. Slowly, deliberately, I rose. I did not look at him directly. I turned my body away, letting silence form the boundary he could never cross. For a moment the room stilled. He said nothing. I gave nothing. My silence was heavier than his rage, my turning back stronger than any shouted word. As I stepped toward the exit, the scarf brushed against my wrist like Evelyn's hand guiding me out. Behind me, Marcus hissed something under his breath, but it never reached me. The courtroom's echo was not his. It was the gavel, the testimony, the undeniable truth. Outside, the Texas sun poured across the steps. I paused, closing my eyes. Justice had not brought Evelyn back, but it had restored her dignity. And in that quiet victory, I felt her beside me. The courthouse doors swung open, and a blast of hot Texas air hit my face. The sunlight felt almost violent after the heavy shadows of the courtroom, but I welcomed it. My hands were still wrapped tightly around Evelyn's blue scarf, the fabric damp from my grip. Behind me, I heard the first guttural sound break from Marcus's throat. At first it was low, then it swelled into a roar. "Thief! Witch! You think you won? This isn't over!" His voice tore across the steps like glass shattering. Cameras clicked, strangers turned their heads, reporters leaned forward with hungry eyes. I didn't stop. My heels tapped firmly against the concrete, each step steady, deliberate, unbroken. The more I moved, the louder he grew. "You ruined me! That was my life! You can't just walk away from me!" The crowd gathered. Some looked at him with disgust, others with pity, but no one stepped closer. Marcus thrashed in the air with his hands, his tie loose, his jacket hanging open. He looked nothing like the polished man who had walked in so confidently an hour before. He was unraveling before the world, every thread pulled loose by his own fury. Inside me, storm churned, but I did not let it rise. My mind whispered one truth: silence was the greatest answer. If I turned, if I spoke, I would give him power again. Evelyn's face flashed in my memory, her tired eyes, her trembling lips. She had been abandoned in silence. Now I would honor her with silence of a different kind, one that shielded her dignity. I gripped the scarf tighter, lifted my chin, and kept moving. My voice spoke only within me. "I do not need to win against you, Marcus. I only need to protect the memory of my daughter. I only need to keep her dignity whole." He followed a few steps, shouting, spitting his venom into the open air. "You'll die alone, old woman. That's your curse." The words tried to pierce me, but they fell short. I had already known loneliness. I had already faced nights with no hand to hold. What he didn't understand was that solitude, when chosen, was stronger than the false company of betrayal. As I reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, Martha appeared at the edge of the crowd. She touched her chest, her eyes soft, brimming with a compassion Marcus could never comprehend. She didn't speak. She only gave me a small nod as if to say, "You did right." That simple gesture filled me more than any applause or judgment could. Behind me, Marcus's voice cracked. His rage was breaking under its own weight. The crowd began to murmur, not at me, but at him. They saw him for what he was, a man stripped of excuses, clawing at a world that no longer bowed to him. He was noise, nothing more. And I, walking away, was silence. Silence that became power. I reached the car waiting at the curb, opened the door, and slipped inside. Through the window, I saw Marcus collapsing onto the steps, his shouts devolving into curses no one cared to repeat. His figure grew smaller as the driver pulled away. The scarf rested in my lap again, soft against my hands. Evelyn's words echoed, "Don't let me leave you alone, Mama." I whispered back, barely moving my lips. "I'm not alone, my darling. I carry you with me." The courthouse shrank in the distance. The noise faded. In its place, I felt the deep, grounding calm of finality. Justice had been served, not with screams, but with silence, not with vengeance, but with dignity. And for the first time in years, I breathed without the weight of fear. My steps had been heavy when I entered that courtroom, but now they felt lighter. I hadn't destroyed Marcus. I hadn't needed to. His own arrogance had done that for me. All I did was refuse to look back. The house was silent when I opened the door. Evelyn's house, my daughter's house. The air smelled faintly of dust, like a place that had been paused in time. I stepped inside, and the sound of the door closing behind me echoed too loudly. I stood still, gripping the handle of my bag, afraid to move, afraid that if I disturbed the silence, I would lose what little was left of her presence here. I walked slowly through the living room. The couch where she once sat had a blanket draped over it, neatly folded but carrying no warmth. On the coffee table lay an old magazine, its pages curled at the edges, as if she had started reading and never finished. The television screen reflected the late afternoon sun, a blank square staring back at me. The room seemed smaller now, though nothing had changed. It was as if grief itself pressed against the walls, squeezing the air out. I found myself whispering her name, just to test if the house might answer. Evelyn. But only the creak of the floorboards replied. In her bedroom, everything was still in place. The bed slightly unmade, a sweater thrown over the chair, a half-empty water glass on the nightstand. My eyes landed on her journal lying next to the pillow. The leather cover was cracked from years of use. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled it into my lap. The journal was heavier than it looked, as though it carried not only words but the weight of her soul. I traced the lines of her handwriting, trembling as I read the same sentence again and again. Mom, please don't live alone anymore. The words seemed to reach out from the page, pressing against my chest, demanding an answer I could not give. I carried the journal with me to the window and sat down in the chair beside it. The evening light poured in, bathing the room in shades of gold and shadow. Outside, the street was quiet. Children had already gone inside. No cars passed. Only a faint breeze stirred the branches of the oak tree that Evelyn had once told me she loved because it reminded her of strength. I looked at that tree now, its leaves trembling against the fading light, and I thought, after all this, what do I have left? My hands clutched the journal tightly, as though letting go would mean letting go of her. My reflection in the glass startled me. A woman of 67 with lines carved deep around her mouth and eyes, a widow, and now a mother without a child. The hollowness of that truth sat like stone in my stomach. The scarf lay folded across my lap, its blue fabric catching a hint of the dying sun. I pressed it against my cheek, breathing in the faintest trace of her perfume. For a moment, I closed my eyes and pretended she was still here, that if I turned around, she would be in the kitchen, humming while she brewed tea. But when I opened them, the silence was sharper than before, a knife cutting through the illusion. The light dimmed slowly, painting the room with long shadows. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder, marking each second as if reminding me of how much time had been stolen. My heart pounded against my ribs, but there were no tears left to fall, only an emptiness too vast to be carried by crying. I whispered to the stillness, after everything, what remains of me? The question floated in the air, unanswered, yet lingering like smoke. It was not despair, not yet hope, but something between, a recognition of the void that now defined my world. The room grew darker. I sat there unmoving, clutching the journal and the scarf, the last anchors to a life that had slipped from my grasp. The silence pressed in from all sides, but I held my breath and listened. deep down, beneath the grief, beneath the emptiness, I felt something fragile flicker, an awareness that even in this void I was still alive. But for now, all I could do was sit by that window in the fading light, wrapped in her memory, and allow the emptiness to speak its truth. I woke before dawn and sat at Evelyn's kitchen table with her journal open and the blue scarf around my shoulders. The house held its breath. The clock ticked like a metronome for sorrow. I traced one line until my finger tingled. Mom, please do not live alone anymore. If I could not keep my daughter in this world, I could keep the door of my heart from sealing shut. I could let love keep working. By 7, I had brewed coffee and made a list. At the top, I wrote a name that felt like a vow, the Evelyn Fund. Under it, a sentence to guard my judgment when grief tried to blur it. Rapid help for cancer patients who face treatment alone. I folded the page into my purse, placed the journal beside it, and drove to the hospital under a sky the color of cooling steel. The oncology social worker met me in a small room with tissues and a pot of weak coffee. Her name was Patrice. Her face carried the practiced tenderness of someone who stands near other people's storms without being swept away. I told her I did not want a monument. I wanted a mechanism. Rides to radiation when the bus never comes. Rent to keep a bed under a patient after the chemo drip. A copay paid before the window closes. While medicine preserves bodies, dignity preserves the will to keep showing up. Patrice nodded and told me what they see each week. Patients discharged with instructions they cannot follow. No ride, no money for a copay, no person to sign a form. The cost of loneliness is measurable. Mistreatments, shortened lives. I set a folder on the table. Inside were the court orders, the bank confirmations, copies of Evelyn's final bills now settled, and a one-page mission statement I had written at 3 a.m. We reviewed it line by line. The fund would pay small, urgent expenses within 24 hours. The social workers would email brief requests with a name, a need, and a plan. I would approve and pay. There would be a ledger, there would be accountability, there would be speed. Patrice called in the director of patient services and a finance officer who spoke in careful numbers. We walked through logistics until the idea hardened into a framework with dates and signatures. A trust account would be opened in the fund's name. An independent bookkeeper would reconcile monthly statements. The hospital would send receipts for each disbursement. Expectations were clear. So was the purpose. At the bank, I met a woman in a navy blazer who carried the brisk kindness of a gatekeeper. She opened the trust account, added me as primary signatory, and ordered a debit card so we could pay for cabs, co-pays, and last month's rent without delay. She slid signature forms across the desk. As I wrote my name, the letters looked unfamiliar, as if I had been promoted into a post I never applied for. When she handed me the card, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the knowledge that grief was about to be translated into action. Back at the hospital, we signed a memorandum of understanding. Patrice gave me a single sheet with 3 names and 3 needs. Maria, stage 4, an eviction notice after missed wages. $300 would stabilize housing until a disability check arrived. Hugo, radiation scheduled at 6 a.m. No family. $30 in bus fares would cover a week of rides. A child whose aunt had vanished. Pain medicine not covered until the 1st of the month. $60 short. The numbers were small. The impact would be large. I felt my back straighten as I read. I made the first transfers while sitting in the chapel. Light poured through a stained glass panel and laid a band of color across my knees. I set Evelyn's journal on the pew and spoke into the quiet. If I cannot keep you, I will keep what you asked of me. I will not let my heart close. Let this fund be a door that opens at the hour someone would otherwise turn back. By mid-afternoon, the hospital emailed confirmations. The landlord would halt the eviction. The transit card was loaded. The pharmacy would release the medication. I replied with one line that steadied my hands. Love is an action, not a memorial. Then I drove home through heat that made the air wobble above the road. At the kitchen table, I drafted a letter to the women in my book club and to neighbors who once watched Evelyn ride her bike in circles. I told them the fund was active, that it moved quickly, that every request would be specific and personal. I did not ask for pity. I asked for partnership. By evening, my phone chimed with pledges and practical offers. A woman promised to knit warm caps for the infusion room. An old friend sent a check with a note that read, "For Evelyn's courage." Paperwork can turn into a hiding place. I knew that. Yet the work did not numb me. It focused me. After dinner, I opened the journal and wrote 2 principles in my own hand so I would not forget them when nights grew long. First, speed saves hope. Second, dignity is a form of medicine. I tucked the journal under the scarf and rested my palm on both. Night gathered at the windows. The oak outside moved in slow waves as if the wind were breathing. I brewed tea and sat in the chair where Evelyn once tied her shoes before work. The fund existed. The signatures were real. The first disbursements had reached their destinations. I could not bring my daughter back, but I could make sure other people did not face their worst hour without witness. If I could not keep my child, I would keep her instruction. Do not let your heart close. In that knowledge, the house felt less empty, not healed, but lit from within by a small, steady flame. The pediatric floor was painted in ocean colors. Paper fish drifted along the hallway. A whale smiled above the nurse's station. The brightness tried hard to make suffering look smaller. It helped until you looked into a room and saw the IV pole, the pale child, the hopeful adult trying not to cry. Patrice walked beside me with a chart pressed to her chest. "There is someone I want you to meet," she said. "His name is Liam." We stopped outside a door covered with crayon drawings. A baseball cap hung from the doorknob like a sentry. Inside, a boy sat cross-legged on the bed with a coloring book balanced on his knees. His head was shaved. A constellation of freckles dotted his nose. The IV line looped gently from his arm to the pump. He looked up when we entered, curious but not afraid. Children learn to read faces quickly in places like this. "Liam," Patrice said, "this is Miss Hale. She is Evelyn's mom." He nodded, thoughtful, the way a boy nods when he is listening for meaning rather than manners. I pulled a chair to the bedside and introduced myself. "You can call me Vivian," I said. "I am still learning this place." "Me too," he answered. His voice had a small rasp, like a radio just slightly off station. "I like the fish. The whale looks funny." I smiled. "I like him too. He looks like he is telling a joke he will not explain." Liam considered that, then smiled back. The light that crossed his face felt like sunrise in miniature. He held up the coloring book. "Do you like blue?" he asked. "Or green?" "Blue," I said, touching the scarf at my throat. "Always blue." We colored for a while. Quiet, companionable. The sound of crayons scratching on paper like soft rain. Patrice stepped out to make calls. A nurse came in to adjust the pump, then left with a wink. When the room settled again, Liam looked at me without blinking. "Are you going to come back?" he asked. His voice did not beg. It simply asked a fact to stand on. The question reached across years and opened a door I had kept closed. I saw Evelyn at 5, standing on our porch in a raincoat, her small hand fierce around mine. "Do not leave me, Mom. Promise me you will never let go." In the hospital, she had whispered a different version. "Do not live alone." Both requests were the same at their root. Love me by staying. "I would like to come back," I said, "if you would like that too." He nodded once, as if granting permission. "Tomorrow is a long day," he said. "They said I have a scan. Sometimes I throw up after. It is not scary, just messy." "I am good with messy," I answered. "I raised a girl who could invent mess from thin air." "Was she funny?" he asked. She was light, I said, and the word was true enough to rest inside my mouth without breaking. She loved to hum while she cooked. I hum too, Liam said. He pursed his lips and produced a thin melody I knew at once. It was the same tune Evelyn used to whistle while waiting for water to boil. My throat tightened, then loosened. Grief did not leave. It made room. Patrice returned with a social worker who carried a thin file. She reviewed the basics. Liam's aunt had disappeared. There were no reachable relatives. Child services was involved. A foster placement would be arranged after discharge. He needed rides, meals, and a patient adult while the caseworker found the next address. "We cannot ask this of you," she said gently, "but we can receive it if you offer." I looked at Liam. He met my eyes with the uncomplicated courage only children possess. He did not know what he asked of me. He knew only that presence feels like medicine. I took his hand, warm, small, real. "I will be here tomorrow," I said, "and the day after tomorrow. We will take this one piece at a time." He squeezed once decisively, then returned to coloring. "Blue is winning," he announced, pleased with the outcome. We spent the next hour in ordinary talk, his favorite cereal, a science teacher who made volcanoes on Fridays, the dog he missed, whose name was Orbit. I learned that he feared the beep of the pump more than the needle, and that he liked apples cold but toast warm. Every detail felt like a thread, and together they braided into commitment. When I left the room, the hallway noise seemed softer. Patrice walked with me to the elevator. "You do not have to carry all of this," she said, "but if you choose to carry some, we will share the weight." "I am not trying to replace what cannot be replaced," I answered. "I am trying to obey what my daughter asked of me. Keep your heart open. Do not let loneliness decide your life." Patrice nodded. "Then tomorrow we will start early," she said. "He will need a ride to the scan. We can arrange a voucher, or you can bring him yourself." "I will bring him," I said. Saying it settled something inside my chest that had been rattling since the night the monitor fell silent. On the way out, I stopped in the chapel again. The same band of colored light crossed the floor, shifting an inch toward the pews. I placed my palm over the journal and spoke where no one could hear me. "If I cannot keep you, Evelyn, I will keep faith with what you left me. I will stay when staying is the work." Outside, evening had softened the heat. The trees along the sidewalk caught the last light and held it. I tucked the scarf under my chin and walked toward the parking garage with steps that knew their next place to land. Behind me, the pediatric floor hummed with labor and mercy. Ahead of me, tomorrow waited, not with answers, but with a seat beside a boy who had asked a simple question. "Are you going to come back?" "Yes, I will." And for the first time since the courtroom, the word felt like breath. When the papers were signed and the approvals settled, I drove Liam to my house. The car ride was quiet at first, the boy pressed against the window, watching the trees blur into green streaks. He held a small backpack that seemed too light for the weight of his years. I wanted to reach for him, but I knew children sense desperation like dogs sense fear. Instead, I let the silence carry us until he turned and asked softly, "Is there a garden where you live?" "Yes," I said. "Not much, but enough for flowers to remind me of spring." When we arrived, the front porch creaked as though greeting us. The house smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. I had cleaned the guest room the night before, setting fresh sheets and placing Evelyn's blue scarf over the back of a chair. It felt right, like a welcome, rather than a shrine. "This room is yours now," I said. He placed his backpack on the bed, looked at the scarf, and asked, "Did she wear this?" "Yes," I answered. "She loved blue. It made her feel strong." He touched the scarf with the reverence of a boy who knows objects can carry memory. "Then maybe it can stay here. It can keep me safe." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The scarf was no longer a symbol of my loneliness, but a bridge between past and future. The next morning we went into the garden. I handed him a small shovel and he dug with the vigor of someone who still believed the earth listens. Together we planted a young sapling I had bought at the nursery, a maple that would one day spread wide arms of shade. Liam wiped dirt across his cheek and grinned. "It will grow taller than the house," he declared. "And stronger," I said, pressing the soil down firmly. "Trees remember the hands that planted them." As we watered the roots, he began to whistle. The sound was thin at first, uncertain, then it gained shape. I froze, the watering can tilting in my hand. It was the same tune Evelyn used to hum while waiting for water to boil, the melody she carried unconsciously through childhood into her final days. Liam looked up at me, puzzled. "Is something wrong?" "No," I whispered, my chest tightening. "You just reminded me of someone I love very much." He shrugged, as children do when unaware of the power they wield. Then he whistled louder, carefree, letting the tune drift into the branches above us. I stood still, tears welling, but not the tears of despair. They were the tears of recognition, of knowing life insists on echoing itself. Later that evening, we sat at the kitchen table with sandwiches and apple slices. Liam glanced toward the guest room where the blue scarf now hung. "Do you think she would mind me keeping it there?" he asked. "No," I said firmly. "She would be glad it has someone to protect." The house no longer felt like a mausoleum. It felt like a place where breath and laughter could return. For the first time in years. As Liam yawned and leaned against my shoulder, I realized that grief, when shared, becomes a bridge rather than a prison. That night, I tucked him into bed, the scarf visible against the chair. He whispered before sleep, "Good night, Miss Vivian." "Good night, Liam," I answered. In the darkness, the house felt alive again. Weeks later, I drove us to the Texas coast. The ocean had always been a place of reckoning for me, where the vastness of water made human sorrow feel both sharp and small. Liam carried a backpack with snacks, and I carried a framed photo of Evelyn wrapped in a towel. The blue scarf was folded carefully inside. The sand was cool under our feet, the waves restless, but not violent. I led him to a quiet stretch where shells dotted the shore and seagulls wheeled above. I placed the photo on the sand, facing the sea. The frame glinted under the sun as though Evelyn herself was catching the light. "This is my daughter," I said quietly. Liam knelt beside me, his face serious. I placed the scarf next to the picture, its fabric fluttering with the wind. Before I could press it down, Liam searched the ground, picked up a smooth stone, and set it gently over the corner of the frame. "That will keep it safe," he said, simple and sure. I nodded, swallowing hard. The gesture pierced me deeper than any eulogy could. My child had left, but this boy, carrying his own wounds, was now anchoring her memory with his hands. We stood side by side, the tide moving closer. The foam licked at our shoes, retreating and returning with patient rhythm. Neither of us spoke. Words would have been too clumsy for what the silence was shaping. My grief no longer felt like isolation. It felt like communion. I closed my eyes and let the roar of the waves fill me. For so long, silence had been my enemy, reminding me of absence. But here, with Liam beside me and the photo glimmering in the sun, silence became a sanctuary. In my mind, I heard Evelyn's last plea. "Mom, do not live alone anymore." It no longer sounded like a chain, it sounded like freedom. By opening my home, by letting Liam's laughter echo in my garden, I had obeyed her. I placed my hand on Liam's shoulder. He leaned into me, steady and small. The horizon stretched endlessly, and for the first time I did not feel overwhelmed. I felt held, as if the ocean itself was whispering that endings can be beginnings in disguise. We stayed there until the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised purples and tender golds. The waves continued their hymn, tireless, ancient. When we turned to leave, I did not take the photo or the scarf back. They belong to the sea now, to memory, to the place where endings and beginnings braid together. Walking back, Liam slipped his hand into mine without asking. His grip was warm, sure, alive. I realized then that Evelyn's echo would never fade. It had simply found a new note, carried forward in a boy who had asked me the simplest question, "Will you come back?" And my answer, clear as the tide against the shore, was yes. Night has finally settled over the house, and the rooms breathe in a soft, steady rhythm. Liam is asleep in the room across the hall, the blue scarf hanging on the back of his chair like a quiet sentinel. I stand in the doorway and watch his chest rise and fall, one small boat riding a gentle tide. In the hush, I feel Evelyn near, not as a ghost, but as a warmth that lingers in the air we share. I lean in and whisper, "My daughter, I am home, and I promise I will not let anyone be alone again." I return to the kitchen where a nightlight spills a pale halo over the table. The journal rests beside a mug of chamomile. The maple sapling we planted earlier is a dark silhouette in the yard, leaves quivering under a quiet wind. This house used to echo. Now it answers. It holds footsteps, laughter, the rustle of homework pages, the small routines that stitch a life back together. Grief still lives here. It no longer rules. The courthouse feels distant, like a storm already out at sea. Justice arrived without spectacle. It came the way dew comes, certain and silent. People asked if I felt triumphant. I told them triumph is not the word. What I feel is alignment, a straightening of the spine, the gentle click of a truth returning to its rightful place. I did not defeat Marcus. He defeated the version of himself he chose to be. All I did was refuse to speak the lines he wrote for me. Sometimes, when the house quiets, I hear the monitor from the ICU in memory, a long tone stretched like a road. I do not run from it anymore. I let it pass through me, and then I listen for another sound. Liam's small whistle drifting from sleep, the kettle beginning to murmur, the maple tapping the window with a shy hello. Life insists. It does not apologize. I open the journal and write tonight's entry in a hand that feels steadier than it did a month ago. The Evelyn Fund paid for a taxi at dawn, a warm meal at noon, a prescription at dusk. 3 people will sleep easier because strangers chose to be neighbors. I imagine Evelyn reading these lines and smiling with that quiet pride she carried when her students finally understood a stubborn idea. She asked me not to live alone. The answer I offer is a life that makes room for others. I move to the window and pull the curtain back a few inches. The street is calm. Porch lights glow like low constellations. I consider everything that has brought me to this night. Widowhood, motherhood, the courtroom, the garden, the shore. Loss has not ended me. It has carved channels where gratitude can flow. Before we say goodbye, I want to speak directly to you, the one listening in a kitchen or a bedroom or a bus, rolling through the dark. If you have known loss or betrayal, would you forgive? What would forgiveness even mean for you? Tell me in the comments, not for argument, but for witness. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and I will see you in the next story. I turn back to Liam and adjust the blanket at his shoulders. Orbit, the shelter dog we brought home last week, stirs at the foot of the bed and sighs the contented sigh of a creature who trusts morning will come. I switch off the hallway light and feel the soft tug of sleep at the edges of my body. Before I leave the doorway, I say one more thing to the room we now share. Evelyn, I am home, and I am not alone. To the person still listening, know this. I do not believe in happy endings. I believe in true continuations, in threads that do not break, only reweave. If you need a sign to keep going, let this be enough for tonight. Rise gently, drink water, call someone who will answer, plant something small. The heart is a door. You are allowed to open it again. I step into the quiet and the house settles around me. The scarf waits on the chair like a blue horizon at dawn. Somewhere outside, the maple holds its ground in the wind. I did not win with words. I won with silence. And in that silence, I found myself again.